Welcome to Coaching Uncaged, the podcast on all things coaching, brought to you by Animas. And now introducing your host, Yannick Jacob.
Towanna Burrous, welcome to the podcast. It is so good to have you.
Oh, I am so excited to be here with you. It's been too long to be able to have a conversation with you. I mean, I know it's virtual, but still, I've been looking forward to speaking with you.
Great. And you were my top pick once I started. At some point, me and Rob from Animas, when he was there, Nick Bolton, we were starting to think, well, where are the diverse faces in coaching conferences? That's kind of how a lot of this started. Like, well, where are the other voices? I mean, they're out there, they exist. Like, we know them, but why aren't they have more representation? So I started Googling a bit and see who's an active voice in that. So not just an active coach, but somebody who's actively creating community, creating spaces to bring more diverse coaches out into the spotlight and educating people. So you're the president and founder of the CoachDiversity Institute. You created the Black Coaches Network, Black Life Coaches Network, right? So nice play on words. I'm like, So you've done a lot in education. You created a lot of community. You've trained thousands of coaches. You're a PCC yourself. You've done a lot of work in the executive coaching space. You've had like 3 decades in federal government and in corporate sector. You seem to have done so much. And when I listen to some of the content that's out there, you seem to have a pretty heavy fan base as well. I've listened to some podcasts and people are just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to you. So I really appreciate your work and what you're doing. And I really look forward to this conversation. I wonder if there's anything to fill people in on that might be interesting for people to know in terms of better understanding where you're talking from.
Right. So I'm based in Washington, D.C. metro area. So not too far from the White House. And so
the warehouse?
The White House.
The White House.
And the reason why I bring that up is because we're living in a time where, the social unrest and politics are now completely integrating itself into our household conversations, inside our offices and workspaces in ways that it hasn't in the past, or not since the Vietnam War, if I could be more specific. But yeah, I'm based in DC. And one other thing that's important, that is I'm a mother of 2, and my children, and being a mom is obviously my why in everything I do. So no matter what efforts I put up in the world, no matter how much my purpose drives me, I keep them in mind.
Well, I resonate with that. With my daughter being 8 months old, we talked about this earlier. It seems to do something, and it's interesting what that does, not for coaching clients, but also for coaches. Right? We tend to want to create a world that's going to be the kind of world that we want our kids to live in.
Actually, that is actually the biggest part of it. When you speak to many coaches across diverse lines, we always want to know why. Why did you choose this career path? Why did you choose coaching? Why do you use coaching? And many of them speak for themselves. Obviously, that personal story, that personal need, that individual journey to something bigger, different, better. And then others is about family. A lot of them decided that they wanted to pursue a path or profession that would allow them to have flexibility so they could be at home. So the why that most of us enter this space to make the world a better place, either for yourself or the people that you love.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, I'd love to dive into the diversity topic already, but I wanted to start with something different because, I'm sure you talk about it a lot and I definitely want to talk about it. But there's something interesting I found. You have quite an interesting educational background. You've studied at UPenn, you've studied education, a master's and a doctorate in education, but then you also did a doctorate in divinity, and your bachelor degree was in chemistry. And I've heard you talk about math and numbers and how that influenced your way of thinking, and I'm sure your coaching style. So I wonder if you could introduce people a little bit to how that shaped you as a coach.
That's a great question. And often that's a end of the session kind of question, but I appreciate you bringing it up front, because One thing about my decision to pursue math and science, it was because I was always bright. You know, they always told me I was smart and I was bright. So I could almost do anything. That's what they said, used to tell me. You can almost do anything. But the problem is that I didn't really have interest in anything. You know, I didn't find a passion in certain paths in education. College wasn't even top of mind. In fact, it wasn't even an option because my parents couldn't afford it. So for me, it was be a great student and see what happens next. Well, one day when I was being disruptive and bored, I had my 7th grade math teacher who frustrated me because he always called on me in class, embarrassed me because I didn't have the answer, who decided that he was going to punish me for being disruptive and gave me detention. And giving me detention, he had that one-on-one time with me to lecture me and create this atmosphere where I was completely captivated by this world of math. And he showed me how to problem solve, how to use math in a way that I had never, ever thought before. 7th grade math ended up moving me all the way through calculus, of course, and I wanted to use math in a way that I could create and design, and that's where chemistry came in. Initially, I thought I was going to work for Procter & Gamble and create products and maybe cosmetics or something, but then I realized that my purpose was to really do something different in the world. And so I decided to take a different path and join the federal government and began to use my skills in science and mathematics in a way that I believed it was needed and necessary in the 80s.
Right. So that problem solving, I mean, a lot of how I've heard you describe coaching, a lot of coaching is about problem solving, right? Somebody comes in with, even if it's a goal or desire or fantasy or somewhere going forward, there's usually obstacles in the way. Otherwise people would just get there. So how did you apply that? Like that? I mean, there's so many different coaching approaches, right? So I guess what I'm digging into a little bit more is that math attitude. How does that translate into coaching style?
Yes. So as problem solvers, and when students come to class who are problem solvers, I resonate with them because I get what they want to do. They want to get to the outcome. They want to get to the goals. And so I was trained in project management because as a scientist, when you're building and designing new innovative type of things, there's a project cycle from the design phase all the way to the build to phase. When you're building something, you have these milestones. And so problem solving and designing and creating the problem solving journey from beginning to end, I really enjoyed that process of staying organized, the idea of starting something and finishing it, even if there are hiccups and bumps along the way. So the challenges and frustrations from solving an equation to building an engineered widget or something, it's all the same. And so when I discovered coaching, the part that I love the most is how do I assist someone who has challenges of life, solve those problems that are getting in the way so they have success on the end. And so I reverse engineer. So when you're hearing what a client wants, I always reverse engineer. So what are the problems and the obstacles that are getting in the way? And so that's how problem solving is inserted into coaching. Many of us who are problem solvers, they love that part. It's like, oh, I get it. So, okay, let's reverse engineer. They don't really want to spend time in the transformation place with emotion, etc. And you have to learn that part. But if you're able to clearly see the end, then the theory or the thesis, all of those things can really kind of present themselves in a very nice way.
Great. Thank you. I wonder how your coaching style evolved and particularly how that diversity element it got into your coaching style. So maybe you could start with a kind of a framework or a definition of what diversity means, and then tell us a little bit about how your coaching style evolved as a result.
I appreciate that. I can tell you when I first defined diversity years ago, I would only describe diversity as layer 1, the visible differences. That's really how I would describe it. It was my lived experience. But then with education and experience, I realized that there was a second layer of diversity that was often overlooked. And that's education, culture, the way you approach life in any particular variety.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I realized that my own transformation, my own growth and learning, and my desire to be understood, and my desire to be welcomed and to feel like I was a part of certain environments as a professional. I learned that what people are most afraid of is the layer one, but I wanted them to understand my layer two. And the visible is only what most people concentrate on. So it's my role or my task to say, I need you to know me below the line, below the visible, which is what my math teacher did when I was in 7th grade. He looked beyond what he saw, the behavior. He looked beyond the fact that I was a girl and women did not live in the science space. He looked beyond that and said, you have other potential. You have the aptitude. He explained what he saw beyond the visible. So that was a conversation in my life constantly, to where I had to then cultivate that. As I matured in life and had more life experiences, the diversity became layer two. And so when I first started coaching, though, Yannick, it was interesting because I was only focused on like attract like, other women like me. And they didn't necessarily have to be a woman of color, but just any other woman who was a mom, who are dealing with the transitions of life and trying to balance a career. Okay. Yeah. Remember the words balance before we got, understood there's no such thing as balance. But that's what I was looking for initially. And then I realized as time went on that that's really not it. There's more to it for me. My passion wasn't just in layer one. I don't want to just work with women that look like me or have a similar story. I want it to go deeper than that. And that was the discovery of what was really missing. And so that was the journey, the exploration. And then my clients really began to set the tone. My clients then started saying, Towanna, we want coaches that are different. We want to have representation in the coaching, coaches that they can choose from that look like the employees that we have in our company. And so the need to have the diversity became the request. And so that's how I started the Black Life Coaches Network, because my clients said, bring us more.
Yeah, and there's a couple of points that I'd love to pick up on. First one, probably that this idea of diversity being more than you can see is so relevant to coaches, because how many coaches do I meet whose client base is like them? Right. And that's not necessarily how they look like. And I love that you emphasize that. It's like there's diversity of thought. Right. But there's similarity in, like, for example, I attract complex, deep thinkers because I'm a complex, deep thinker. So if you put yourself out there, the people who resonate with you will most likely be people who are more like you. We have to be careful that we don't make assumptions about what worked for me is going to work for them because they seem to be like me. But I think for coaches, it's really helpful to start recognizing, well, who are my clients? And to what extent are they like me or different? And how do we navigate that difference? And I find that really interesting. That's what I wanted to ask you about. It's like clients like to hire a coach who is very similar to them. It makes it easy to connect to them and get into a conversation. But if we're too similar, it's not going to serve us. So I always wondered, is it actually going to helpful for people to work with a coach who's very like them?
Yeah. So this is the biggest assumption, because although like attracts like, and that's what we're talking about. Although that happens, we tend to forget that we could live in the same home, be raised by the same parents, and have two different lived experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very different still. Even though we may have everything else in alignment, that one thing will make a difference. And so I would submit for those who are listening to consider, look at your practice, and then consider how many of them are very similar to you because of the attraction, and how much have you discovered that's below that? Because it's that part that requires you to see them and to hear them differently than you previously. So if you just assume, okay, so we can connect or I can relate to you because we come from Iowa. That's, sure, that's one way to look at it. But what about my lived experience in Iowa that's different from yours, that creates my personality or shapes the way I view the world? What about my disempowering thoughts that come from my past that completely impact how I create the future? All of those are a part of the coaching conversation that many coaches are not trained to listen for or to even consider. And that's why we created the CoachDiversity Institute.
Oh yeah, some kid from Iowa might have so much more in common with like somebody from Tokyo, Japan, than with a person next door, right? And there's a cultural commonality, like, oh, we're both German, so that means on some level we understand each other. But beyond language, what else is there?
That's
so right. I think it's good to separate the kind of diversity that we all have. Everybody is different and unique, right? Right. That is diversity. But then also it's so important that coaches who look like their clients, there's something so important about that. So I know that's part of the argument for, let's get more coaches who, even if it's just the surface level, it's important that we have more Black coaches out in the public space. Could you talk a little bit more about the kind of different, that level of diversity and why it's important in coaching?
Absolutely. So clients will want to, select a coach the same way we select a physician, just like you said, for comfort. That it's, if I can get as close to common as I can, something that we have in common. And if layer one diversity, visibly and or by gender, if I can get as close to common as I can, I will feel more comfortable. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's about comfort. With that comfort comes the ability to create a safe space. And also for me to be able to say, I don't need to explain myself as much to you as I would to someone who doesn't understand. So if I use a particular metaphor, there's a higher probability that you understand the use of that metaphor in the context that I used it, versus having to explain it to someone who would absolutely not understand. So the clients are coming because they want to say, let's get all the other stuff out of the way first. If I have to explain myself, that eats up time. So I want to cut to the chase. Do you get me? Do you get me? If you get me, then we've gone 50 miles down the road.
Yeah, and that illusion of you get me is actually an important one in the beginning, right? It doesn't mean that the coach should get sucked into that and say, oh, I get you because we look alike or we're both from Iowa. That's the coach's work, but initially allowing the client to enter a space where they can feel comfortable to open up, that's so important.
And I can tell you, though, after all these years of doing this work, having a roster of diverse coaches, different languages, age, sexual orientations, ethnicities, that when they pick a coach, they are typically different, but not necessarily from the same community that they initially thought. Because when you interview a coach, because in our world, you get to interview your coaches and then you pick the coach of your choice. And so in doing that, we have noticed statistically that they typically pick someone, but that's not necessarily always from the community that they represent. So it's just a matter of, is this coach able to connect and establish that first round of safety or trusted space when they first start talking and I'm learning your style and approach? Can you capture my attention? And can you also provide me that structure if I want structure in that first 15 minutes of our conversation? And that's what we teach our coaches. It's like, it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what race or gender, ethnicity, etc. It doesn't matter. The question is, are you confident in your skills? Are you able to see the difference, respect the differences, acknowledge those differences, and also make sure that you understand you're not there to relate. To relate would then cause discomfort. If I relate, I'm saying that my experience is just as important as your experience, and that's not true. If you connect, you're saying your experience is extremely valid, it's important, has nothing to do with me. Though I may understand it, though I may speak the same language, you are so much more important than my lived experience. And so any coach who's taught how to coach across a diverse line understands that it can offer a safe space in the same way if we came from the same community.
Yeah. And I think that getting the opportunity to first of all enter a space where we can have a conversation, it really makes all the difference. Just yesterday, I talked to a black female coach who got invited to join a coaching roster of an organization that's predominantly white. And she said, I've been on there for X amount of time. I've never got any work from them. I had a few consultations, but then I never got any work. So she's like, well, is it because I'm black? Is somebody going to enter a conversational space with somebody who seems to be more like them with that illusion of they will get me, even though a good coach, it's not about that. But, at first it's about the client, And
but you're making a great point again, because in our research, if the client, let's say he's a white male will have access to the entire roster. He may have access to other white males, but in this particular case, he interviews everyone, but the one that resonated with them happened to be a Black woman or another white male. So when you are on a roster and you're not selected, the one thing you have to begin to wonder, why weren't you selected? Mm-hmm. And if the why is given to you, are you willing to listen to what it is that you were doing or saying versus how you presented yourself? Mm-hmm. Being Black is the second part of the equation. First, did you hear where you weren't necessarily a good fit? Mm-hmm. And is there a common denominator between you not having a good fit with this person, that person, and the other? Are they saying the same thing? And if they are saying the same thing, then it's on you as the coach to pivot. Mm-hmm. And to continue to look at, how can I fix this part? How do I present a different, conversation? Or what do I need to, start with first? So you just tweak your presentation and you ask different questions, but you have to first analyze the data, find out exactly what's going on, find out what's common before you decide that it's about my race or my gender. Mm-hmm. Because that's the second thing. You want to first get what's common.
Yeah, is that the second thing, I wonder sometimes? And I think it depends on the person who's doing the selection, right? Because you mentioned something that was really, I found it really profound. The reason why it's so important, I heard you say at some point, is that we have more diverse rosters of coaches, mm-hmm. is that we give access to people to whom it's really important to have somebody who looks like me, because they feel more safe to enter that kind of space. Maybe there's a feeling that they would be judged less. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter when it comes to that opportunity for somebody to engage in a coaching space. And you talked about this cycle of dysfunction being passed down, because the main points of contact for somebody in the Black community was, what was it? The barbershop or the family, friends, clergy. Yes. And if the coaches are not around who look like me, then it's less likely that somebody's going to engage in that, unless they really understand coaching already. And then no, it doesn't really matter.
Absolutely. And there is a need for that representation. It is a need, right? There are many people who have their preference and there is a need. So that's one group. Then there's the other group who are open and they want to be challenged by someone different from them. Mm-hmm. I want to be challenged by a coach who's different from me because I want to work through my own bias. So a person of color may choose to work with a white coach or someone different from them and say, I want to be challenged. I want to stretch. I want to be able to ask, honest questions because there's a growth moment, or vice versa. So the point is that, you can work with multiple coaches in your life. Mm-hmm. I always like to submit for people to consider the variety sometimes that is needed and necessary to accomplish certain goals. To say, how curious are you to do this and to work with someone that is different from you to see what the outcome could be. Mm-hmm. And so it's everything applies. The growth is, as coaches, we need to look at how we are limiting ourselves. Mm-hmm. And how we are restricting, or what I used to say in business is, you're leaving money on the table. You are limiting your community of clients because you are afraid potentially of getting it wrong or not being prepared for the moment. And that is valid. If you're not ready, don't try. If you're afraid or you know that this is not something you're into, don't do it. We all know that that's a rule. So don't attempt something that you know you'll be terrible at. So coaching across lines may not be your thing. But for those who are interested and curious, go for it. Get the learning and go for it.
Oh, yeah. And it's about growth, right? I mean, it's so well documented now, finally, that diversity in the workplace, in organizations, is leading to much more innovation, because people challenge each other just by showing up as they are. Whether that's diversity in thought or diversity in cultural background, the ideas that people bring in, different philosophies, different ways of thinking, values, beliefs, if that clashes in a constructive way, the wonderful space of growth, right? Absolutely. And so talking about research, a colleague of mine, Christian van Nieuwenburg, him and one of his students, I forgot his name, unfortunately, I'd love to mention him. He just presented at a conference a piece of research that they've done. Coaches in a Japanese, I think, organization was coached by Japanese coaches and Western coaches. And then they looked at what was the experience of being coached by somebody from within your culture and not within your culture. And it was so interesting to see the benefits of being coached by somebody who's very different, but also what is in the way of good coaching. And I loved my agency work. For a while, I was working with an agency in New York where people didn't really know much about me. It was a very minimal profile. And so I got exposed to coaching clients that had no idea who I am. I have no idea who they are. And that was the most diverse client group that I've had so far, because they didn't reach out to me already having a sense for who I am and what I'm about. And I loved that. So when we talk about growth, just for the coach to be exposed to a very diverse client group, many different clients, it's going to help you grow as a coach immensely. And yet all the marketeers, they hammer it into our heads that we need to have a specific avatar and know exactly what our niche is and figure out what kind of person our coaching approach is a good match with, and then really double down on that.
Well, I support that theory of finding the avatar when you're first getting started.
It helps, for sure.
Yeah, and then after that, let's expand that and grow that to have multiple avatars, so that we are using our gifts in larger community. When you have a coaching skill and you're really a great coach, think about how many people are not benefiting from your gift. And we love what we do as coaches. I mean, we're all professionals who come from something else most often. And we decided to stop doing one thing and start doing the coaching thing, right? And in doing that, we make a choice around how we're going to use this gift and who do we believe should be benefactors of this gift. And if you're really great at this work, I always say, grow professionally and personally, and consider how many more could use and have access to that gift. How can you be curious enough to just try? Just try.
I wonder where to take this next. I wonder if you have a hunch. I have a list of things that I would love to ask, but I wonder if something come up for you that you would continue it into.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question. Is that all right?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let me ask you a question about the diversity that you were exposed to. So you mentioned that working with the firm in New York and how you were able to have that exposure. Can you name or talk a little bit about some of the things that you learned or what you gained from that experience?
Yeah, thank you for that. Where do I start? I've noticed that I was making much more use of much more of a variety of the kind of coaching tools I had in my backpack. There were some of these clients just was very hands down, practical, goal focused, solution focused work, grow model stuff, making an action plan, working with accountability. And that made huge progress, and I was like, that's not the kind of coaching that I'm really interested in at the time. My background is in existential coaching and positive psychology, big questions and happiness. And all of a sudden I find myself in the room with somebody who just makes so much progress by being textbook grow model, offering them a framework to just really do some good thinking, performance oriented. It was a joy, I wouldn't want to do that every day. I wouldn't want to do that most of the day, or even, most days of the week. But like seeing the impact that something that I don't necessarily care about from a passionate coaching growth kind of perspective, but just applying a tool and seeing somebody grow really made a big difference, because at that point, the insight was, well, I could just apply coaching as a tool. I don't need to be super passionate about, I don't always have to apply the existential or positive psychology angle on this. It often comes in quite naturally. We often, big questions came up just because of the way I'm engaging. But really being committed to, what does this person in front of me want to do, and how can I help them do it? And then apply what would be valuable to them, not what I would be interested in.
Mm-hmm. I see. And then, so with how you evolved as a coach, because you went through different stages of growth with your coaching, when did you notice the biggest change with your practice?
Good question. I'm hesitating because there's been a few kind of thresholds that added a lot of growth. A big one, the first one that came to mind, was when the existential framework had kind of really set in as a foundation. Once I had started thinking about and making sense of how can positive psychology and existentialism, which is the two kind of ways that I was trained in as a coach, how do they make sense together? Once I had a philosophical framework where I can integrate these different bits from different approaches, a bit from CBC and a bit of psychodynamic and lots from positive psychology and a bit of scaling question, miracle question from solution focused, to start being able to integrate that into a foundation of who I am and how I relate to people and how I relate to myself. That was huge. Once I felt, I'm standing grounded and I'm being able to reach out to many different areas of coaching and pull stuff in.
Okay. And so what is the typical client on average? What frame do they come in? Who are they? Can you describe that avatar? Because that's a very, very unique, but very specific coaching approach. And I'm wondering who's attracted to that? What would that client look like?
I've never done avatars. I occasionally, depending on the bit of work or the bit of writing I've had in mind, I occasionally imagined people I wanted to talk to who kind of were in that. When I started focusing work more on, helping other coaches be the best coaches they can be, I started to create a bit more about that, because all of these business structures came in. I'm like, there's a core part of my business. Let's think about who that coach is. But then there was the very experienced coach who's interesting in something else, but there was also the coach who's fresh out of training and trying to figure out, who the hell am I as a coach? So I always liked it that way, right? I always like to have very different, diverse clientele, because it keeps my work very interesting. And whenever the client speaks first, I can then apply whatever is needed to help them. If I were to speak first and kind of putting something out there that I want people to respond to, I think then it's really important that we know exactly who we're speaking to. But, that was not really something I was interested in, even though I see the value in it.
Right. So can you tell me what is some of the challenges? Not the coaches that come to you for more learning and growth, but for those who hire you for themselves, what are some of the common challenges that they're having? Just so that I can understand a little bit more.
Yeah. Are we going somewhere with this, I wonder? I have a hunch that you have a path here, which you may or may not share. I'm happy to just go with your questions.
Yes, please do. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, one of the things that clients, typically, I really can't say typically, because we're all in this existential condition, and, it's very diverse what the human condition brings and what people want to talk about. But one of the themes I often notice are transitions, right? Big endings That might be the kids leave the house. Who am I now? Or I'm coming back to work after having kids, or I'm stopping working and I'm facing retirement or some significant change. Maybe a breakup, a relationship ends, or some significant next life period. And there is a lot of sense making around who am I becoming and who am I and what has stopped and what is beginning. So that's definitely a big theme.
Yeah. So if I said to you that I'm interested in working with you, and the challenge that I'm facing is a transition from my corporate space. I don't feel like I belong there anymore. I'm not being promoted. Historically, this company has not promoted a woman of color, a woman period, but definitely not a woman of color. And so it's time for me to make a decision. It's time for me to leave because I no longer feel that I can grow here. Would I be a client? Would I be a client?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Well, it depends on you, but like I would be, that sounds great.
Right. And so,
I mean, it sounds horrible, but it sounds very interesting to work with. Yeah.
Right. So then what I really appreciate is the way you responded to what I said, that you weren't wondering, how am I going to work with a Black woman who just feels rejected by our corporate, environment because she's Black and it's time for her to leave. You moved past that point and saw my human challenge. And it didn't matter what my layer 1 was, though you heard the problem. You heard my reasons for leaving that was backed by statistical data. Like it is truly true that they're not probably going to hire you. And they've proven over and over again that they probably won't. But you weren't afraid to have that conversation or begin that coaching relationship because you didn't see the part that I said initially. However, I submit that being a Black woman who is feeling like she doesn't belong can follow me job to job. So your position as a coach would have to work with me to resolve how I see myself in this moment to transition, but not also don't forget that history can repeat itself, or the data, the statistic will show up somewhere else. How do you prepare me as your client for the potential high probability that the next job could potentially do the same thing? So then it's a different conversation regarding, okay, let's resolve you launching someplace else, but let's not forget the high probability of it happening again. What do you want to do differently, knowing that this potentially can happen again?
Right. So it's about spotting that pattern and disrupting it. And it really doesn't matter so much whether I can understand or relate to the situation that you're in, because as a coach, I'm bracketing that stuff. Maybe it helps if on some level I might know what it's like in my own personal experience to have been in an environment where I wasn't appreciated, or where there seems to have been some unfairness, or it seems like a dead end. So I think that helps to empathize, but I think I cannot experience what you experience. And I think that's so important for coaches to recognize and not fall into that trap of, I know, I get you, I know what it's like. I've been there, I've done that.
Exactly, because relating and having a lived experience or a shared experience is not needed and necessary when you are coaching across diverse lines. You may have it and it will support you. Like you said, I've been rejected. I know what rejection feels like. I've had these similar storylines, or this narrative is played in my own head. True. But that's not what's entered into the coaching conversation anyway. It's not about you anyway, right? It's all about the client, but you may have the record playing in your head. But the idea that you're getting the point that with the work that you do and the type of problem that I have, you could see the problem, but you can also see me. You can see my challenge and also hear the potential fear or frustration or sadness as I explain what I want to do next. But you can also not ignore the fact that my reality and the systemic injustice that exists, even if you don't know enough about it, maybe you've read about it. If you're in preparation for me being your client, maybe you decided, let me go read up on something just so that I can kind of have some context around this, so that I at least can offer up. And am I willing to ask the questions when I don't have knowledge? Can I tell the client that I'm not trying to be right at ever? I want to make sure I'm informed. So I may at times have to pause and ask you to clarify the meaning of certain words. If you can give me a little bit more context around that, because I'm not familiar, or if you're willing to do that, then I'm the coach for you.
Yeah, I remember being terrified early in my coaching journey to enter any organizational coaching engagement because I felt I don't speak business. I've never spent time in a 9 to 5. I mean, I've done the only organization I've ever worked with as an employee were education organizations, and very different. They try to be corporate, but they're just anyway. I won't go there. But I'm like,
That's a great example. That's a great example of not having the background, not having an MBA, and being called upon to coach people who operate and navigate in high places of business, and you're going to coach them. There's a level of intimidation. There's a level of feeling like I'm not good enough for this moment. I'm not smart enough for this moment. All that plays out in your head. Every coach has the right to run the storyline like, am I the right fit? And do I know enough? Yeah. We have every right to do that. And we also have the right to say, no, I'm not the right coach for you. But in those times and in those moments where you believe like, I may not have an MBA, but I know the variables of this equation. And I know that if I am able to solve this problem based on what I know, I think I'm going to have a winning situation.
Yeah. And it depends a bit on your coaching style, right? Because usually what I see in supervision a lot is if somebody's very concerned that they don't speak the language, that they don't understand what the term means, and they don't have the expertise, then usually that points to a coaching style where there's a consulting element or a teaching, that there's an assumption that I need to understand and I need to have expertise in order to coach this person well. Whereas when you have a coaching style, that's a good coaching style, right? If you do have the expertise, many coaching clients want that from coaching. In my books, that's not necessarily coaching, but many coaches out there, they have that element to their work, and that's valuable and clients love it. But when you come into a coaching engagement from a position of, well, I'm going to hold space and I'm going to help you think, sometimes the question that a 4-year-old asks you are exactly the stuff that opens the doors into some new thinking. And especially sometimes somebody coming in from the outside who's never worked in an organization asks the right kind of questions. There is a fantastic TED talk. I forgot who it was by, but it's like why business needs the humanities and the arts or something like that. And this guy tells the story of how their business was about to fail because they couldn't solve the client's problem. And that was the only client they have left, or their biggest client. And, the deadline was very soon. And they're just like, they went to the pub, to the bar, and was like, okay, we're done. And then out of a whim, and I'm paraphrasing horribly probably here, but there was a barkeeper with a philosophy major. And somebody was half jokingly, well, why don't we send in, I don't know, Ed, the bartender? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, fuck it. What do we have to lose? So they sent in this philosophy major who asked very different questions, came out 4 hours later or something, and completely changed the scope of the engagement. So since then, I think something like half of their people are from outside of the tech space. So again, another wonderful evidence that bringing in diversity of thought, it's going to benefit so much.
And not being afraid to do it. I think we've seen so many case studies, lots of research, as you say, that there is a business case for diversity, for innovation and obviously profit and growth. But the other thing is because our world is changing, the entire planet is coloring itself. We can no longer ignore the amount of diversity that our planet is now evolving into, and we must begin to honor and respect that a lot of our future clients are going to be different from us in more ways than we're used to. And are we ready for that moment? And just look at the statistics in the United States. We have our census, and our census reviews basically what the numbers are, broken it down by race, ethnicity, and etc. And probably no different if you look at other countries. The difference is that the United States, we have so many cultures, so everyone's kind of living in this space, and we have lots of races and ethnicities. But when you go to the continent of Africa, people divide it by their countries and their tribes. And there's diversity in that, even though they're all African. And so there's that global majority is of color. And if the global majority is of color, then it will make perfect sense for us to embrace the knowing that more people different from you are probably going to call or on you for services.
Yeah.
And being ready for the moment is obviously your choice, but being ready for the moment, I believe, is what I'm called to do, is to help the people be ready for the moment.
Yeah. There's this really interesting dichotomy, it seems, of the benefits of working with a coach who's like you and the benefits of working with a coach who's really different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite sure what to make of that, right? I guess we need both, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
You need both, and that's exactly right. The idea is that if I'm able to pick the coach of my choice, I can pick someone who's the same or someone absolutely different, right? That's the whole point. So the number one rule in coaching is making sure your skills are sharp, and you can, you have the confidence in the moment to do it. That's the number one rule. And I think for clients who are seeking great coaches, having the ability to say, today or for this reason, I want to work with someone that's XYZ. And for another reason, I need to work with someone because of ABC. So at the end of the day, the variety is needed. So everything through the research you spoke about from the Japanese company and the way that they were measuring, that research, to what we have discovered in CoachDiversity, to what you're seeing in the UK and across across Europe at this point, because coaching is actually gaining significant momentum in India and Africa. And the number of coaches are growing substantially there. It's because of all that growth. We're going to see more coaches that are agile and they're able to do it.
Yeah. So what would you recommend for a coach to, how can they put their diversity out there, right? If they were to write a coaching profile, or a coach who's writing their website, maybe revisiting what they've written on their website, given that diversity goes beyond what people can see and just their image, what would you recommend we put out there?
That's a great question. I would say, if you speak multiple languages, make sure that's there. If you enjoy different types of recreation, put that there. If your level of education, obviously that's one thing. But when you are describing the type of coach you are, if you're able to describe it in a way where people understand that they're welcomed, that I work with people I work with creatives, I work with people who are challenged by, with these types of things. It's being able to show in words who you are and what you're willing to welcome. And who you are, we typically hide behind the basics: education and location. But if you begin to talk about the fact that you're a parent, you love hiking, you speak 2 languages, the fact that you are a single parent, the fact that yes, your education is the one thing, but different types of foods or travel, give the people a peek into your world. One of our coaches, she is a former lawyer, and she does, work with abroad in working with like the World Bank. And she's done a lot of work in different countries. And that's a part of her bio. Because when I see that you work in Africa, that you work in Asia, that you have a diverse travel life, that is invited. That tells me a little bit more. You volunteer. All of those things matter. A lot of coaches do that these days, and that attracts, much but then there's stuff that they hide because they wonder, if I attract someone that is from Uganda, will I be able to support them?
Yeah.
It does open, but don't put it out there if you're not ready for it.
Oh yeah, I remember a time I had 2 Facebook profiles. So I mean, it brings up an old dilemma for coaches when they create their website. Do I niche down and tell people who I'm working with, or many coaches want to keep it diverse and broad, and they welcome everybody. But by definition, it's so much harder to talk to somebody specifically with impact if they do that. So talking about who you are as a person, I think it's really helpful to kind of open the doors into that so people can find themselves. But reality is that the About Me section is not being visited if what's on the landing page isn't talking to a person.
Right. And so there was another one of our alumni, bilingual, but is not from the country that, the languages she speaks. And she lives in a very non-diverse state here in the US. And I remember having a wonderful conversation with her about what she needed to modify on her website to attract the clientele that she was really desiring, and leading with what was important. That was important to her first as a human being, like what were your passions, and leading with that, and then assigning the words regarding your services and the other things that are attractive. And so every coach goes through a season when they push what they want people to see. That's their comfort. I want people to know this about me. This is my comfortable space. But it's kind of the uncomfortable stuff that people want to see. It's the stuff that you hide that they want to know if you're my coach, because the hidden things that's the truth of who you are. And if I know that you're sloppy and you're not perfect, and you don't mind splitting verbs and having dangling participles at the end of your sentence,
I can relate to that. Yeah, that's the people. That's the posts on social media that time and again get the most engagement and the most love and the most connection. It's like, here I am, and this is a bit vulnerable, and I'm not perfect, and I don't have my ducks in a row. And I'm so glad I see the coaching industry and coaches moving away from having this fantastic image of this perfect human being who's with a powerful story, and now everything's great.
It's all of that, and I need to know that you're great, but I also need to know when you're not great.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Let me have a little see. There's a lot of questions I still in the room, and I'm having an eye on the time. Obviously, we wanted to aim for an hour. We could talk 4 hours, I'm sure. I wanted to, talk to me about accountability. I heard you say really interesting things about accountability, and I know it's not a diversity specific topic, but like it seems to have a pretty profound place in your coaching and in the value of coaching. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Are we talking about the personal accountability or the
accountability as part of the purpose or the value that coaching provides, and to what extent, that's why is that so important?
So when from our classrooms, when we first examine how we are supportive or how we show up, there is the how do I say this without losing my words and sharing too much from a classroom? Authenticity. Okay, so authenticity and accountability in our space goes hand in hand. So I need to know first, are you being honest and authentic with what you are doing as a coach? And at the same time, can I see the level of support, and can I see the level of commitment, and can I invest in myself and my growth, so that as I'm being more authentic, how much am I able to assign to where I have growth and learning, so that I'm constantly held accountable. to be able to diversify my learning and my growth so that I can maintain a certain level of standard and authenticity and understanding culture, having cultural awareness, not just around coaching and coaching culture, but community, the world, your family, where you navigate. And so accountability is making sure you withhold those parts of you that you examine, not withhold, examine those parts of you that you typically hide, and making sure you are honest about who you are, where your biases are, where you get in the way, and being able to say, okay, I'm willing to deal with these parts of me so that I can be more accountable to me and those who I serve. I want to be able to be honest. I want to be able to present myself in a position of power and authority. I want to have the knowledge, but if I am not self-aware and I'm not paying attention to how I show up, how I'm perceived, and I'm hiding those things, and I don't live in that authentic place, then the level of accountability and the level of support will be measured. It will not be, it won't be strong, it won't be powerful, it won't, you won't create trust. Because these days people can see when you aren't committed to growth. I hope I'm answering the question in the way that you intended.
Yeah, so this accountability goes much beyond, okay, last time we talked about this and what's happened in that space, and you've committed to certain actions, and tell me about that. It seems a lot bigger than that.
From the client's angle is one thing. I was speaking from the coach's side, that the coach being more accountable. The coach being more accountable to themselves, making sure they hold themselves to certain standards, to growth and learning. That's what I was speaking from.
Right.
And their own investment in their truth and their authenticity and how they choose to show up in the world, being accountable to yourself, being accountable to the people you serve. On the side of the client, accountability when we are dealing across diverse lines, let's say leaders who are learning to lead more inclusively. How do we hold them accountable? How do we keep them in the game so that they stay charged and excited about even when things get hard? The pandemic shift a number of leaders who weren't prepared for the moment. How being able to get a client to see that you don't have to get it all right in this moment, but it is important that you show up. And then in showing up, kind of similar to what I was saying about coaches, being authentic, and when you're knowing that you're not great at this, being honest about when you are not ready for prime time and you need to, check yourself out for a while before you come back in. So in our space, accountability starts obviously with the honesty, and being able to measure how much you're willing to do in any given moment, and being honest about what you're capable of and what will rub you wrong or trigger you. In our spaces of diversity, we let people off the hook. So if you say that I just can't do it, we explore what got in the way, but more so, we also talk about the other complexities that played a role, the other people that played a role, and other things that do that. So we do that as coaches, and we also do that as clients.
Yeah, I want to ask another different question. What I've noticed over the years is that the more experienced coaches seem to get, like at the very beginning, it's very tempting to give advice, and offer knowledge and wisdom. And then I noticed that there seems to be a U-curve going on, that when coaches are very experienced and they've, been around the block a number of times, especially someone like you who does a lot of training, you did a lot of consultancy work. To what, it's tempting to bring in a consultancy element or a teaching element or a training element or a sharing or offering of some sort to our coaches. And some of your engagement is training, educating. Your background is in education. Your degrees, half of your degrees are in education. So I wonder to what extent, or if at all, that is tempting for you to bring into your coaching engagements, or if you do that in some way.
The only time, and typically it's only when I work with executives, CEOs, or the C-suites within these large corporations. It is only when they come to me because of my expertise that we have a combination of coaching and consulting, because there's a specific request. Otherwise, it stays out the room. Only because, there's no place for it. There's no place for my opinion, or there's no place for my advice. This is about you elevating your expertise and you getting the confidence you need to showcase and shine. But yeah, only when my executive coaches who know I have that deep business background, that strategic background, that they call on me for that purpose. And it's only done after a certain point. So we'll get through the coaching part. They've designed whatever they're going to design, and they want me to come in and proofread it or give thoughts. And I would add questions to the things that they've written versus telling them what to do. I would ask a question. So I can use my brain in that way, but I have to frame it in the form of a question versus saying I would do this versus that. I would say, if you do this, what would be the outcome? And what's the worst thing that can happen based on this? I mean, there's lots of ways that you can avoid the space of consulting by reframing them into questions, but using that expertise as the frame.
Yeah, that makes sense. And getting the coaching part done before you go there, I think, is really smart, because I've noticed that once you open the doors to giving something, it's difficult to pedal back. Whereas, it's difficult to go from consulting to coaching. It's easy to go from coaching to consulting.
Exactly. And if you start consulting first, then you're going to build a codependency. And that's what we want to avoid. We don't want to create that codependency where then your client is waiting for your approval or waiting for you to say, that was great, like a teacher and a student. That's not what we want to create. That's not the relationship we want to create. Therefore, coaching and then consulting, or reframing like a coach, would be the best approach. And that's what's worked for me over the years.
Yeah. I can't help but wonder, it must be difficult for you, I'm assuming, to sit in some of those coaching engagements when you coach someone who really isn't very aware at all and has very, let's say, interesting ideas about what it means to have a diverse workplace, for example, if you're working with a leader. What's it like, and how do you manage when you're in that kind of coaching engagement where part of you just wants to be like, let me educate you on a couple of things. Let me sit you down and explain you how some of that works. How do you keep your coaching hat on?
Okay, so in that environment, there's a combination of education and coaching that has to happen. So let's say there's a leader who deeply needs to understand, who receives some type of feedback from their employee, and they're saying that they aren't necessarily the best leader, or that leader is, had offended again and again many people in their organization. Education and coaching have to go together. I just can't coach you regarding what you did or what you want to do differently. I have to educate you at the same time. You must understand terminology. You must understand what's a microaggression. If I don't tell you what a microaggression is, you'll never understand what you've been doing to these people that has caused them to have complaints, or the feedback that, your behavior is projecting these types of things. I must educate you on what all that means and interpret that for you. And then while you're learning and increasing that knowledge based on your interest of wanting to know, I can coach you through the challenges and the stickiness that keeps showing up because of your lack of knowledge. People's behavior is all around sometimes the lack of exposure and knowledge. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's helpful to have that happening in the same room, because while you're educating or after you're educating, you can hold a space where they make sense of that, as compared to now, where could you learn about that? And then that client decides to do a course or read a book or talk to somebody that they know who could educate them, and then bring that back into the coaching space.
Absolutely. So at the executive level, most executives or senior leadership, they want private places to learn. They don't want to learn in a classroom environment with their peers because they're quite embarrassed about what's going on with them, where they've offended, where they're afraid, where their biases are, etc. So we are able to educate and coach because it's a safe space, it's contained, confidential. In the organization, shifting culture in an organization, you still must educate and coach at the same time, but you do it in larger numbers. Again, you don't just do a class and you walk away. You educate and you're coaching over a period of time because you want the learning to rest. It needs to be a part of the culture, embedded in the soils of the culture, and you want to see real change. So it's always education and coaching when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and making space for people to ask questions like, can you please explain, what does this mean? Like, I don't get it. Our coaches have to have that combination and be willing to go there and offer that support.
It's so refreshing to hear because like when I started coaching, it was all about, well, this is coaching and this is teaching and education, and we have to keep the two separate. And when I was teaching, there was always a coaching hat. I always wanted to engage the group in questions and in learning. And, you know, yes, you share some ideas and you share some knowledge and you share some theory, but opening a space where people can make sense of that seems so vital, you know, and I think it was always expected that those spaces get created outside of education, whereas actually they should be merged. And refreshing to hear that, you know, an attitude of, well, in coaching, that's actually really helpful too, because so many coaching schools say you must not educate, you know, keep the two very separate.
In our world, we have to educate. In diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's important that people get on the same page with terminology. People are experiencing major, that people have pain. People are hurt. And like, let's just talk about the pandemic as an example. The pandemic created a completely changed everything for so many people. People live alone. And now we find that people have been living alone. They've lost family members. They've been displaced from family. Although we're turning the corner, at the end of the day, many of our leaders weren't ready for the moment. And I mentioned earlier, a lot of leaders forgot that they were employees too, that they were human. And that they could be impacted in a real way, just like their employees. And there was no place for them to go. Yeah. There was no safe space for them to talk about what they were going through silently, privately, or openly when it came to the pandemic. And so in that way, when we're talking about educating and being supportive and, you know, coaching at the same time, we had to teach the leaders how to have more empathy. We had to teach leaders how to exercise muscles that they did not ever use before the pandemic.
Isn't there a risk, though, that when we teach or educate, that we claim a truth that might still be evolving? You know, whenever we teach, depending on how you teach, right? Depending on how you present what it is. But like, I think when I put myself into the shoes of a coach listening to this, they're like, well, often teaching is understood as, well, here's the truth.
Actually, it's not about here's the truth. When we talk about, let's say, empathy, for an example, we're talking about how do you create an environment where your employees are seen, heard, respected, and valued. I don't have to define anything other than, do you understand what truth is? Do you understand what values are? So if we can agree to the terminology, and I don't have to explain that part, then you're able to take the basis of how do you respect, how do you show appreciation, how do you show value? And however you do that, you define that part. So the teaching or the learning is clarifying what do you know, current state, and how what you've been through creates the challenge of your ability to exist as a powerful leader in this moment.
And if you share that, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please do.
If you share that within a relationship where you can present an idea, for example, well, respect, and a leader might say, well, no, they need to respect me. You know, that's how this works, this business thing. That's how you get the best out of people. They need to fear you, and you need to keep them under a certain line, and they need to do what I say. That's how business success works. You know, so if you present an idea like that and you have that kind of rapport, that person can say, no, I disagree. And then you're in a fantastic conversation.
the thing is that when someone says, well, they need to respect me, what else could be true? And what do you think their needs are? What are their needs? So when we talk about being seen, heard, respected, and valued, it's yes, you need to be respected. Absolutely. But in what ways do they need to be respected?
Yeah, exactly. And that way we're engaging them in a conversation based on something that we presented, and I think that's why one-on-one learning spaces or intimate learning spaces are so valuable, because we can really engage with, something that is still evolving for people, and being confronted with difference. That's what diversity is, right? Navigating difference.
Yes. And I appreciate you isolating the teaching element and educating while you're coaching, because in just that example alone, how much more your client can exercise language that they typically haven't used in other spaces. It's the ability to be able to get it wrong, but at the same time, it's like, I don't really see it that way, and let me tell you why. And as the coach, I'm listening to that. And I'm wondering, I become even more curious as to say, okay, what part of your life created that dynamic to where it's unmovable? Like it's a non-negotiable for you. And if it's a non-negotiable, you're entitled to that. But just understand that in this culture, this work environment that you're in, that decision can create an environment where people perceive you as being toxic, or perceive you as being not a team player. You don't fit.
Yeah, and then you have a choice.
So you're at choice. You stay and thrive, or you leave and thrive.
Yeah, and that's what coaching is about, opening up room for choice, right?
That's right. And so it's the idea of incrementally bringing and presenting that element of teaching and learning, but they're doing it themselves. You're just asking the right questions to unpack that brain of theirs as they're trying to figure out, like, what side of the street am I on? Where do I want to go with this? My favorite question to executives who are always the most complicated is, what do you want your legacy to be?
I love that question.
Yeah, because you're projecting a certain image and you'll be known for that. And it may have changed. Okay, let's rewrite. If you want it to be different than it was 5 years ago, what is it now?
And then they have to negotiate that legacy in the system in which they exist, and other stakeholders involved. And then it's what a beautiful conversation to have.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that's good. I love that question.
Talking about legacy, I've got my eye on the time. I think we need to bring this to a close. What's the legacy that you want to leave? And if I were to ask the question more specifically, there's an audience of coaches, some very experienced, some very new to coaching, some may be considering becoming a coach who listen into this podcast. What would you like to give coaches? What would you like to ask them? What would you like to encourage them to think about? Is there something that you would want to say in relation to the legacy that you want to leave?
Yeah. So the legacy I want to leave is I am the behind the scene kind of coach. My gift is to teach change agents. That is my gift. I am the person behind the scenes helping you be great. And so I submit to all those who are listening to consider, in what ways do you want to be great? Now, we all look at life in different ways. Some of us are small fish in a pond. Some of us are medium-sized fish in a lake. Some of us are thriving in the ocean. No matter where you see yourself in the world, consider how great do you want to be in that space? And what do you need to be great? And then as you grow from one body of water to the other, if you choose to, or you just stay where you are, look for someone who enjoys being that superpower behind you, showing you and creating that environment to say, these are the things that you need to make this great for you. If you're missing anything at all, let's figure out what you're missing so you can stay great and continue to grow. So that's my legacy. I want to graduate so many coaches into this space who are not afraid to coach across diverse lines, who's not afraid to challenge themselves through those difficult conversations and how they have formally presented to themselves, and they want to do something different. That's the life I'm living right now, and I love it, and I'm going to stay right here for quite a while.
Great. Hey, thank you for your work, Towanna. Can you just share a little bit on how could a coach join that sphere? CoachDiversity Institute, maybe Black Life Coaches Network, maybe any other communities where there's a space where people get involved. If people found themselves inspired by what you're creating and want to be a part of it, where could people go?
Well, they can find us on social media at, Coach Diversity is at everything, Instagram, all the platforms, LinkedIn. But our website obviously promotes all the different types of courses that we offer, but we have an amazing community. If you are not ready for any more learning, because we're constantly learning, we have an amazing community of alumni. And if you ever want to touch bases with others who are from our program and you just want to create a relationship and just find another coach who's trained in that area and you want to just build friendships or something, reach out. I'm happy to connect you to some of the most amazing alumni. We have over 1,000 alumni and they all have gone through the journey of transformation and we are truly a family.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick.
Cool.
Thanks for listening to Coaching Uncaged. If you want to find out more about becoming a coach, developing your coaching skills further, or training as a coaching supervisor, then head along to animascoaching.com. Thanks again and catch you on the next episode.